Welcome, everyone. This is the Raja Leaks podcast.
Great to be back.
We are opening the files today on, well, a real geographical head-scratcher. It's this perfect storm, really, of finance, ideology, and maybe even espionage, all starting in, like, the least likely place imaginable.
Well, absolutely.
We're going to trace Jeffrey Epstein's movements back to 1988. Now, this is a guy whose life seemed to orbit global capitals, right? London, New York, Palm Beach.
The usual haunts, yeah.
But he took this very specific, very intentional trip to a tiny town in rural Iowa.
It really does sound like fiction when you first hear it. You know, you list the names involved later, Epstein, Ray Dalio, maybe even KGB figures like Kryuchkov, and you're thinking Moscow, London, maybe that private island.
Right.
But no, it's Fairfield, Iowa, a town with what? Less than 10,000 people.
Right.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is to map out this whole network, the ideology, the money that was centered right there in that small Midwestern town. We're not just asking if Epstein went there, because we know he did. The question is why? Why was he there? And what kind of lasting global influence network was he plugging into?
It's a massive undertaking, mapping this influence. We've pulled together a really complex set of sources for this. We've got specific items, artifacts from that infamous Epstein birthday book. And we also have detailed excerpts from a pretty deep investigations series looking into the history and the modern use of Soviet active measures, you know, those long-term strategies meant to undermine adversaries.
And we're using that 1988 Iowa trip as the starting point.
Yeah.
The nexus. We're going to try and connect what look like totally separate worlds. You've got high-stakes global finance over here,
Yeah.
and then seemingly harmless kind of new age meditation movements over there, plus discussions about eugenics, human evolution, deep geopolitical games. It's a wild mix.
It really is.
And the trail leads from the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the TM guru, right up to some of today's most powerful investors and, frankly, some very influential internet philosophers.
Okay, so for you listening right now, why does this matter? Why this deep dive? Well, our mission here is really about knowledge transfer. It's about helping you develop critical thinking skills without just drowning you in data.
Right.
You really need to understand how global influence works, the architecture of it, how systems of belief, even ones that sound really positive like spiritual growth or world peace, how they can actually become tools, vectors for geopolitical power players, how they can be used to shape the narratives that, you know, we all encounter every single day. We want you to see the whole map, not just the individual dots.
See the connections.
Exactly. See the connections.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with the proof. The hard evidence that actually confirms this, well, frankly, bizarre trip. The fact that Epstein went to Fairfield in '88 comes from a very specific and pretty notorious source.
Right. It's his 50th birthday book, compiled back in 2003. It was this collection of letters, tributes, whatever you want to call them, from hundreds of his associates.
Yeah, a real who's who.
And the key piece for us is a letter written by an investor named Bill Elkus. He ran an investment management firm out of San Francisco, a longtime Epstein associate.
Okay.
And Elkus writes about this 1988 trip. He sets the scene really clearly for Epstein's 50th. Now, the context he wraps it in is, unfortunately, this really crass, kind of gross story about Epstein's alleged behavior back then. It hasn't aged well, to say the least.
Not surprising.
But the logistical details in the letter, they're solid. They're concrete.
And Elkus describes the location perfectly, doesn't he? He calls it a town of less than 10,000 people between Ottumwa and Burlington. I mean, that pins it down.
Yeah.
Deep rural Iowa.
No question about where they were.
So what was the official reason given in the letter for these two high-powered guys, Epstein and Elkus, heading out to the middle of nowhere?
Well, Elkus explains it like this. He says he was managing money for the Zimmerman family, and they lived in Fairfield. So he writes, I had invited Jeffrey to come to Fairfield to see our investment operations, meet the Zimmerman family, and learn more about their major charitable projects.
Okay, so investment operations and major charitable projects. Sounds plausible on the surface, maybe?
Maybe. But you look at Fairfield in 1988. It just wasn't some burgeoning financial center. Not at all. The town was completely dominated, really, by one single pretty unique institution.
And that's the key, isn't it?
That's the key. The only thing powerful enough, magnetic enough, to pull a sophisticated financier like Epstein and his money manager Elkus away from New York or London or wherever was Maharishi International University, MIU. There was nothing else there on that scale. Nothing.
Let's talk about MIU then, because it wasn't always in Iowa, right? It started somewhere else.
That's right. It was founded back in 1971, out in California, actually, by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the spiritual leader who really hit the big time globally when he started teaching Transcendental Meditation, or TM.
Yeah, he got famous through the Beatles, the Beach Boys, people like that in the late 60s.
Exactly. Huge profile. But the Maharishi's goal was, well, much bigger than just teaching meditation to individuals. He wanted to build a whole university around TM principles.
Okay.
The core idea was something they called coherence. The belief was that if large groups meditated together in a unified way, they could create this positive energy field.
Right, I've heard of this, the Maharishi effect.
That's the one, the Maharishi effect. They genuinely believed this collective practice could generate like a measurable wave of positivity.
Yeah.
And the ultimate goal, the ambition, was literally world peace. They were trying to use consciousness itself as a kind of geopolitical tool, a utopian vision, really.
So how did they end up in Iowa?
Well, in 1974, MIU made a big move. They relocated the whole operation to Fairfield. They bought the huge campus, like 370 acres of a bankrupt college called Parsons College.
Wow, okay.
And that move basically cemented Fairfield as the global epicenter for this consciousness-based utopian peace movement, which logically brings us right back to the Zimmerman family.
Because they weren't just clients whose money Elkus managed, they were deeply involved in MIU. They were patrons.
Big time. They were essentially the financial engine behind a lot of it. William Zimmerman, the father, was the founder of the Pick and Save discount store chain. Very successful, mostly based in Southern California, so big money there.
Okay.
But the family's connection went even deeper through his son, Stuart Zimmerman. Stuart was actually a former trustee of MIU. He was heavily involved. Apparently, he was a key organizer for this huge event they held in late 83, early 84. They called it the Historic Taste of Utopia Assembly.
A Taste of Utopia Assembly in Fairfield, Iowa. That must have been quite something for a town that size.
Oh, it was a massive international event. Yeah. The sources we looked at say this assembly brought together, get this, 8,000 people.
8,000.
8,000 people.
Yeah.
From over 40 different countries, all descending on rural Iowa to practice these advanced TM techniques together. And the claim was, that this single event created a worldwide wave of positivity. And if you go to the MIU campus today, it's now called Maharishi University of Management. By the evidence of the Zimmerman support is, well, it's everywhere, tangible stuff. They funded a place called Utopia Park. Stuart Zimmerman paid for the recreation center. One of the main rows on campus is literally called Zimmerman Boulevard.
Wow.
So it just shows you the scale of their commitment. They were all in.
Okay, so when Elkus wrote in that birthday letter that he invited Epstein to Fairfield to learn about the Zimmermans' major charitable projects.
It wasn't just some vague reference.
No, it was a coded way of saying they were going specifically to the global headquarters of the Maharishi's World Peace Movement to discuss its operations, its funding, its future.
Precisely. And the travel logistics totally back this up. All the records we have place Bill Elkus living and working in the Los Angeles area right up until the year 2000.
So this wasn't just a side trip on the way somewhere else?
No way. This was a deliberate detour, a specific flight plan, LA to the Midwest, just to meet with the Zimmermans about MIU. It was clearly a mission, not just some casual client meeting.
And it seems like the connection wasn't just about managing their money, right? It looks like it went deeper into a shared ideology, something Epstein was clearly being brought into. We see Elkus showing his commitment later on in politics.
Yeah, that's a crucial piece. Elkus's later actions show he was way more than just a financial advisor who happened to have these MIU-connected clients. Fast forward to the 2000 election cycle. Campaign finance records show Bill Elkus donated a pretty hefty sum, $11,250, to a guy named John Hagelin.
John Hagelin. He was a Harvard physicist, right? And he ran for president several times.
That's him. He ran under the banner of the Natural Law Party. And Hagelin wasn't just some random candidate Elkus liked. Hagelin was a professor at MIU, and later he even became its president.
So the Natural Law Party was basically the political arm of the whole MIU movement.
You could say that. It was their attempt to translate TM principles directly into government policy. And check this out for how tight the network was.
Yeah.
Back in 1992, Stuart Zimmerman, the son, the guy Epstein was supposedly visiting in '88, he actually ran for U.S. Senate in Iowa.
No kidding.
Yeah. And guess which party banner he ran under?
The Natural Law Party.
Bingo. The Natural Law Party, directly affiliated with Hagelin's presidential bid that year. So you see this network, it was incredibly tight-knit, totally ideologically driven, and completely dedicated to achieving the Maharishi's grand vision. Epstein's trip in 1988 put him smack dab in the middle of the highest circle of a movement, aiming to, well, fundamentally transform global civilization.
Wow, okay. So not just a quick trip out charity donations.
Yeah, that Fairfield campus might look quiet, kind of tucked away. But the ambitions flying out of there were anything but small town. They were aggressively global and overtly political. John Hagelin, the physicist Elkus donated to, he really embodies this whole effort to use TM philosophy to influence actual statecraft. Washington, Moscow, they were aiming high.
So Hagelin was basically trying to sell TM techniques as like a replacement for traditional defense or diplomacy?
Pretty much, or at least a powerful enhancement. That was the pitch. And this ambition led to some, let's just say, really bizarre attempts to get the attention of high-level government people. We absolutely have to talk about the yogic flying incident.
Wait. Yogic flying, you mentioned this earlier. This is the levitation thing. And they invited the CIA director to watch. How on earth did Hagelin try to justify that kind of claim to someone like the head of the CIA?
Okay, so the Maharishi introduced this technique, yogic flying, back in the mid-70s. The claim was that it was an advanced stage of TM, and it would lead to actual self-levitation. Now, visually, if you see videos of it, it looks more like, well, vigorous cross-legged hopping.
Right.
But the claim was literal levitation. So in 1987, Hagelin sends an invitation to William Webster, who was the director of Central Intelligence at the time.
Yeah.
He asks Webster to come personally witness a demonstration of yogic flying.
And I'm guessing the DCI politely declined.
Predictably, yes.
Yeah.
But the reason his office gave for declining is really telling.
What was it?
Webster turned it down based on advice from his staff, laid out in a memo, and that memo specifically cited serious concerns about the organization's track record. They pointed to a prior lawsuit fraud and libel filed against the TM organization by one of his own followers. And the core allegation in that lawsuit, that the group had falsely promised followers they could, quote, learn to fly. So when you have a claim like that, bordering on the absurd and a history of being sued over it, well, it immediately raises massive red flags for any serious intelligence or security official trying to figure out if this group is legitimate or, just kind of flaky.
Well, that makes sense. But, okay, the U.S. government was skeptical. That didn't stop them trying to reach out globally, especially towards the Soviets.
Not one bit.
Yeah.
If anything, they doubled down on international collaboration. They tried to leverage this common ground, this shared fear of existential threats, like nuclear war. Hagelin and the Maharishi's own think tank, called the Institute of Science, Technology, and Public Policy. They hosted these conferences over the Netherlands between 1994 and 1995.
Okay. What was the theme?
The main theme was achieving invincible defense. Not through weapons, but through consciousness technology, through TM and related techniques.
And what's really fascinating about this is who attended. It wasn't just academics talking theory, was it? They actually got high-level people from the former Soviet Union involved.
That's the crucial part. The attendee lists included high-level military figures, government officials from Russia, and several other former Soviet republics. Now think about this. This is the mid-90s. For officials from those states, especially military guys, to participate in something like this, an initiative run out of a U.S. institution known for, frankly, outlandish claims about flying, aimed at redefining defense through consciousness.
They would need approval from way up high.
Absolutely. It would have required explicit top-level clearance, almost certainly from the Kremlin itself. So this shows there was this deep, ongoing dialogue happening for years between the MIU network and powerful figures in the East.
So we've got this philosophical movement rooted in Iowa, bankrolled by people like the Zimmermans, trying to bridge the gap between the U.S. and the former USSR using meditation as the tool. It sounds like they built an infrastructure designed to outlast the Maharishi himself.
Oh, the continuity plan was definitely robust. When the Maharishi passed away in 2008, the leadership mantle passed very smoothly to Tony Nader. He was a high-level, trusted figure within the movement.
And Nader got a pretty grand title, didn't he?
He did. He was appointed the leader of something called the Global Country of World Peace, which is essentially the spiritual, kind of virtual nation that represents the future world state envisioned by TM principles.
Okay. And around this time, the public image, the PR strategy, seemed to shift quite a bit. They needed a new public face, maybe something a bit more mainstream, less controversial than the yogic flying stuff.
Exactly. That's where the filmmaker David Lynch comes in. He became absolutely crucial.
The director, David Lynch.
The one and only. His foundation, the David Lynch Foundation, or DLF, was actually set up back in 2005. But after the Maharishi died in 2008, Lynch really stepped up as the key public amplifier for the movement.
And the DLF did something clever, didn't they? They kind of refocused the message.
Very clever. They shifted the focus away from the more, let's say, esoteric or controversial aspects like yogic flying, and went right back to the original simple core instruction. Just meditate, twice a day for 20 minutes.
Much more palatable.
Totally. It made the practice seem accessible, relatable, beneficial for stress, especially when they targeted groups like school kids or veterans suffering from PTSD. It allowed TM to gain widespread acceptance without all the philosophical baggage of levitation or, running political parties.
Okay, and this is where the network Epstein tapped into back in '88 connects directly to the absolute titans of modern global finance. We have to talk about Ray Dalio.
Yes, Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world.
And he's not just a casual meditator.
Not even close. Dalio is foundational to the modern TM movement. He started practicing TM way back in 1969, and he's completely explicit about crediting his professional success to it. He actually said, quote, "Whatever success I've had in life has been more due to my meditating than anything else."
Wow. That's a huge endorsement from someone like him.
Massive. And this deeply held belief translates directly into, overwhelming financial support for the whole infrastructure that Epstein was checking out back in Iowa.
How significant is his support?
It's staggering, really. Dalio is a huge generational-level donor to both Maharishi International University, or Maharishi University of Management as it is now, and the David Lynch Foundation. The exact lifetime total isn't public, but reliable estimates put his contributions just to the DLF in the tens of millions of dollars.
Tens of millions.
Yeah, with sources suggesting he gives at least $4 million annually and has done for many years. So think about that. This movement, born in Iowa, trying to get the CIA director to watch people hop around, engaging with Russian generals about invincible defense, it's all being sustained, secured by arguably the deepest pockets in Western finance.
That's quite a connection, from Fairfield, Iowa, to the pinnacle of global hedge funds.
Okay, the sheer scale of this Maharishi network, the money behind it, its political goals, this global reach, it really forces us to look at it through a different lens, a much sharper geopolitical lens. We have to consider the concept of KGB active measures.
Right.
And to do that, we need to bring in the framework laid out by that famous Soviet defector, Yuri Bezmenov.
Bezmenov's testimony is crucial here. He gave this incredible insider's view on how Soviet subversion strategies actually worked. And his specific claims about the KGB's interest in the Maharishi are, they're extremely telling.
What did he say?
He described how the KGB was apparently very fascinated with the Maharishi school back in India, even before MIU was founded. He called it, quote, "such a beautiful school, such a brainwashing center for stupid Americans."
Brainwashing center for stupid Americans. Wow, that's blunt.
Incredibly blunt. And Bezmenov claimed he was actually personally tasked, as part of his KGB duties, to go and check out which VIP Americans were attending the Maharishi's sessions there. Okay, that's a chilling assessment. But it's really important to understand Bezmenov's core point here, right? He wasn't saying the Maharishi himself was, like, a paid KGB agent.
No, not at all. He was very clear on that. The Maharishi wasn't on the payroll. His value to the KGB, according to Bezmenov, was operational. He contributed, perhaps unwittingly, perhaps not, to the very first, and Bezmenov argued the most critical stage of Soviet active measures strategy. That stage is called demoralization.
Right. Active measures wasn't just about spying. It was a multi-stage process. Can you remind us of those stages?
Sure. Bezmenov laid out 4 sequential stages for ideological subversion. First, demoralization. This is the long game, taking maybe 15 to 20 years, aiming to erode a target country's faith in its own values, ideals, and institutions, just making people cynical and confused.
Okay. Stage 1.
Second stage, destabilization. This is quicker, maybe 2 to 5 years. The goal here is to shake things up, violently hit the economy, create political chaos, inflame social divisions, basically make the system unstable. Third stage, crisis. This is the breaking point. A period of acute collapse may be triggered by internal conflict or external pressure, where the old system just can't function anymore.
And the final stage.
Normalization. This is where the new system, the one favored by the aggressor, is imposed. People are exhausted from the crisis. They just want stability, so they accept the new reality. It becomes normal.
Okay, so Bezmenov argued TM fit perfectly into that first long-term phase, demoralization. How exactly did he think focusing on personal meditation achieved that goal? What was the mechanism?
His analysis was that the whole TM focus fostered this really toxic mix of navel-gazing isolation and political apathy, especially among the intellectual and spiritual elites, the very people who might otherwise challenge the status quo.
So it made them passive.
Exactly. He summed up the core message, the underlying instruction he saw in TM as basically, don't rock the boat. Don't get involved politically. Just sit down, look at your navel, and meditate. It encouraged people to retreat from civic engagement, from wrestling with real-world political and social problems.
The idea was to redirect their energy away from things that matter to the state.
Precisely that. Bezmenov argued the ultimate goal was to distract the attention and the mental energy of influential Americans from real issues of United States into non-issues, into a non-world, non-existent harmony.
Mm.
From the Soviet perspective, it was far more useful to have a population, especially the elites, filled with what he called duped Americans, who were consumed by these internal esoteric journeys, rather than having self-aware citizens who were, in his words, alert to reality and critically engaged with their own political system and its defense. So the movement, even if its stated intentions were purely humanitarian, served the purpose of societal subversion just by promoting disengagement.
Okay, so that's the ideological utility Bezmenov saw in the MIU network for the KGB. But now we have to ask, did it also offer financial utility? Could it have been a channel for money? And this is where the specific timing of Epstein's trip in 1988 becomes really critical. It lines up perfectly with a major period of KGB financial maneuvering.
The timing is incredibly suggestive. You have Vladimir Krychkov, a really pivotal figure in Soviet intelligence, especially on the financial side. He gets appointed head of the entire KGB in October 1988.
Right around the time Epstein is in Iowa.
Exactly. Right around then. And Krychkov wasn't just some bureaucrat. He was the architect behind some of the KGB's most aggressive influence operations, including those involving finance.
And his name actually connects to Epstein's known network even before this Iowa trip, doesn't it?
It does. Krychkov's appointment as KGB head came shortly after he'd coordinated Donald Trump's first visit to Moscow in 1987. And who helped Krychkov with that? A Soviet diplomat named Vitaly Churkin.
Churkin, who later became Russia's ambassador to the UN and was definitely known to be an acquaintance of Epstein.
The very same. Furthermore, 1988, this specific period, was exactly when Krychkov was allegedly masterminding this colossal operation to move huge sums of KGB money. Some reports claim as much as $50 billion out of the Soviet Union and secretly into Western banks and investments.
$50 billion? Why?
The theory is they saw the writing on the wall. The Soviet Union was heading towards collapse. And Krychkov wanted to secure these funds offshore, maybe for future operations, maybe for personal enrichment, maybe both. A massive nest egg hidden in the West.
And the reported channel for moving all that money, the network of Robert Maxwell, the publishing tycoon and suspected intelligence asset, which brings us right back to Epstein.
Exactly. Numerous investigative reports, books, articles, they all suggest that Epstein served as a highly effective, discrete cutout within Robert Maxwell's complex financial network. He was supposedly skilled at moving money across borders, dealing with sensitive clients, keeping things off the books.
And there's another link in that birthday book reinforcing this Maxwell connection.
Right. Nick Leese, the son of an arms dealer named Doug Leese, who himself is often cited as Epstein's original connection to both Maxwell and potentially Krychkov. Nick Leese also has a letter in that 2003 Epstein birthday book. So this whole shadowy world of alleged KGB finance, Robert Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, was operating at peak intensity right when Epstein takes this odd trip to meet the primary financial backers of MIU in Iowa.
So the implication here is pretty stark. Given the KGB's documented interest in the Maharishi Network's ability to influence or maybe demoralize elite Americans, and given the huge financial operations Krychkov was launching right then in '88, MIU could potentially have served a dual purpose for them.
That's the conclusion you start leaning towards. It really would not be surprising if MIU had become a direct or indirect KGB beneficiary by 1988. It could have been seen as a useful destination for some funds, maybe a channel for laundering money, or maybe just a strategic node, a place where high-level financial discussions, perhaps related to Krychkov's $50 billion problem, could be quietly advanced among trusted parties. Epstein's visit suddenly looks less like a simple review of charitable giving, and much more like a potential operational visit to a nexus point that was strategically valuable, both ideologically and financially.
Okay, let's jump forward now, about 3 decades from that 1988 trip. Because the networks Epstein was interacting with back then in Iowa, they didn't just disappear, they evolved. They got tech-savvy, adopted new language, but you can argue the underlying ideological goals stayed remarkably consistent. We need to look at the next generation, the sons and heirs who seem to have carried this mission into the digital age.
And a perfect place to start is with Henry Elkus. He's the son of Bill Elkus, the man who physically took Epstein to Fairfield in the first place. Henry really represents the modern version of this, the young, connected, tech-oriented influence broker.
And he launched his own organization quite young, didn't he?
Astonishingly young. In 2016, when he was just 20 years old and apparently a Yale dropout, Henry launched this organization called Helena,
Helena, I remember reading about it. Some media kind of brushed it off, didn't they? Called it like a nonsense company or just a fancy networking club for millennials.
Yeah, some coverage missed the potential strategic goal, I think. Because it wasn't just about parties. It was pitched as a serious influence campaign, just repackaged for a new generation.
How did they frame it?
Helena was presented as this platform, this curated group of 30 supposedly world-changing global influencers. The idea was they'd collaborate to create breakthrough ideas and then use their combined networks to achieve positive global impact.
So influence brokering 2.0. Who was in this group of 30?
It was a really eclectic mix, designed for maximum reach, it seems. You had Hollywood celebrities like Selena Gomez and Chloe Grace Moretz. You had tech visionaries like Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. You had serious military figures like General Stanley McChrystal. And crucially for our thread here, you had the New Age influencer, Deepak Chopra.
Ah, Deepak Chopra. There's the direct link back to the Maharishi in TM.
Absolutely. Chopra has incredibly deep roots in the Transcendental Meditation movement, and the connection is totally explicit. Back in 1989, just the year after Epstein's trip with Henry's father, the Maharishi himself bestowed upon Chopra the title Dhanvantari of Heaven and Earth.
What does that mean?
It essentially designated Chopra as the divine physician, the representative of the movement's ideals around health, consciousness, and enlightenment. So Henry Elkus's Helena network, by including Chopra, is directly continuing the ideological lineage that his father introduced Epstein to back in Fairfield.
And the actual agenda, the projects Helena got involved in, they seem to point towards goals like transhumanism, right? Accelerating human evolution, which sounds a lot like the original MIU mission of creating a new, more coherent type of human civilization.
You can definitely see that thread. It's evident in their public advocacy. For instance, Helena actively backed an organization called Lycos. It used to be known as MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Right. They were pushing hard for FDA approval of NDMA, the psychoactive drug, for therapy.
Exactly. They had a very public push in 2024 to get MDMA approved for treating PTSD. Now, while the stated goal is therapeutic, many observers see this push as part of a much larger agenda aiming for widespread pharmacological enhancement of consciousness, using drugs to accelerate human capacity.
And that FDA bid failed, didn't it? There were ethical concerns.
It did fail, largely due to serious claims raised by activists about coercive and unethical practices in the research trials. But the intention behind backing Lycos MAPS, the goal of using technology, in this case psychopharmacology, to try and boost human consciousness and capability that resonates very strongly with the Maharishi's original mission to create a new man, a more evolved human.
Okay, so that's Henry Elkus carrying the torch in one way. Now let's turn to Daniel Schmachtenberger. He seems like maybe the most perfect example of someone shaped entirely by this movement. He's like the modern philosophical heir to that whole MIU experiment.
Schmachtenberger is, you could literally call him an MIU lifer. He was raised completely inside that Fairfield MIU environment. We found documentation showing him as a kindergarten student in the 1986 MIU yearbook.
Wow, so born and bred in it.
Total immersion from childhood. His family background is steeped in it too. His father, Randy Schmachtenberger, moved the family to Fairfield by 1985. And his father actually partnered up with Doug Henning.
Doug Henning, the magician, the guy with the big mustache from TV.
That's him. Globally famous magician, but also a completely dedicated disciple of the Maharishi. Henning and Randy Schmachtenberger were partners on this incredibly ambitious, though ultimately failed project to build a TM-themed amusement park in Niagara Falls called Merlin's Wonderland. And Henning himself, by the way, ran for political office under the Natural Law Party banner in the UK back in '92.
Okay, so Schmachtenberger didn't just, attend MIU for college. He grew up breathing the air of the exact culture and ideology that Epstein visited in '88, and now he's out there as this influential public intellectual promoting these ideas.
Exactly. And look at who mentored him ideologically. It links right back to those KGB-adjacent circles we talked about earlier. Schmachtenberger was openly championed, promoted really, by Barbara Marx Hubbard.
Barbara Marx Hubbard, the futurist, the conscious evolution person.
That's her. A major figure in New Age thought, pushing this idea of humanity needing to consciously direct its own evolution. Hubbard publicly and glowingly referred to Schmachtenberger as her evolutionary son.
Okay. And Hubbard's own connections take us back towards the Soviet influence networks.
They do, remarkably directly. Hubbard was known to be a longtime collaborator with a Soviet figure named Genrikh Borovik. Borovik was not just anyone. He was the brother-in-law of Vladimir Krechikov, the head of the KGB we discussed earlier.
Wow. Khrushchev's brother-in-law.
Yes. And Borovic, in his official capacity as head of the Soviet Peace Committee, which was widely seen as a KGB front organization, coordinated extensive citizen diplomacy efforts between the U.S. and USSR in the late 1980s, and who was a key American participant in these efforts, often traveling to Russia and speaking at events organized by Borovic. Barbara Marx Hubbard.
So the ideological line seems pretty clear, from the initial KGB interest in the Maharishi through Hubbard and her Soviet connections, feeding directly into the mentorship of Daniel Schmachtenberger, today's guru of societal transformation.
The consistency is striking, which means Schmachtenberger's various projects and initiatives today aren't just random. You can see them as the 21st century expression of that original MIU mission. Accelerate human consciousness, fix global problems, and establish, quote, a new kind of civilization.
Okay, let's tick through his main initiatives. What are they?
All right, first, there's the Neurohacker Collective, which now primarily operates under the brand Qualia Life. This is a very successful company selling high-end supplements, nootropics, cognitive enhancers, basically practical tools for brain acceleration, improving human mental function. It reportedly generates tens of millions in revenue. It's like the material commercialized version of the MIU evolutionary goal.
Okay, brain hacking. What else? There's a focus on sense-making, right? Like controlling information or narratives.
Yes, that's the Consilience Project. He describes it as a think tank focused on improving public sense-making and dialogue, especially in our messy modern information environment. And look who he collaborates with here. Influential tech figures like Tristan Harris, the social dilemma guy, and people like Jim Rutt, associated with the Santa Fe Institute, and Liv Bory, the professional poker player turned science communicator, who also happens to be the partner of Igor Kurganov.
Igor Kurganov, wasn't he managing Elon Musk's charitable foundation for a while?
He was. So you see the interconnection again. High-level tech, big finance, and this emerging ideological movement all clustering together.
Okay. Then there's the project explicitly aimed at replacing the current world order.
That would be the Emergence Project, which he ran from about 2019 to 2021. This was a really key collaboration with leaders from the Game B movement, people like Jordan Hall and the evolutionary biologist Brett Weinstein.
Okay, Game B. Can you quickly explain that?
Sure. In their terminology, Game A is basically the current global system, industrial capitalism, nation-state politics characterized by what they see as zero-sum competition, geopolitical rivalry, environmental destruction, and just escalating existential risks like nuclear war or AI going rogue.
So Game A is bad, broken, needs replacing.
Exactly. And Game B is their proposed alternative. It's the utopian vision of a future, high-coordination, technologically advanced civilization based on win-win dynamics, shared consciousness, better sense-making. Essentially a system that can solve the problems Game A created.
So creating Game B a new conscious civilization, that sounds exactly like the core MIU mission, just updated with different jargon.
It's fundamentally the same goal. They are explicitly working on pathways to transition away from the current system towards this envisioned conscious alternative. And finally, Schmachtenberger is also deeply involved with some of the main tech watchdog groups. He's collaborated closely with Tristan Harris and also with the Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen through the Center for Humane Technology.
Advocating for less addictive, more humane tech.
Right. And Harris himself has called Schmachtenberger a profound friend and mentor. Schmachtenberger now uses the umbrella brand metacrisis.org for a lot of his work. The framing is that all the world's problems, climate change, AI risk, political polarization, etc., are actually interconnected symptoms of one big underlying metacrisis.
And presumably, he has the solution to this metacrisis.
Naturally, the solution lies in adopting his framework, his model of enhanced consciousness, better sense-making, and transitioning to Game B. So you see this unbroken line, generationally, from Epstein's 1988 meeting about the Zimmerman's charitable projects in Iowa, all the way to this modern digital philosopher whose entire ideological blueprint seems rooted in MIU thinking and has these disturbing links back to KGB-adjacent influence networks.
It's quite a lineage.
And to really close the loop on this whole network, we absolutely have to come back to the financial giant who underwrites so much of the modern Maharishi MIU Lynch network, Ray Dalio. As we said, his commitment to transcendental meditation, starting way back in 1969, it's not just some personal quirk. It's fundamental. It's like the operating system for his entire life and arguably for his massive hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates.
Yeah, he explicitly connects his billions to his TM practice. That personal testimony alone gives huge legitimacy to the whole movement, doesn't it? It reinforces this idea that TM is somehow a key to worldly success and power.
Totally. He's been incredibly open about it, saying TM was more important than anything else for his success. And, as we established, that belief translates into absolutely colossal financial backing for the Maharishi movement, ensuring its influence continues through the David Lynch Foundation and the University in Iowa.
But the influence of TM, or at least Dalio's interpretation of its principles, seems to go way beyond just his personal practice or his donations. It shaped the entire corporate culture at Bridgewater, didn't it? To the point where many outsiders started describing it, pretty chillingly, as a finance cult.
Yeah, finance cult is a term you hear a lot from former employees and observers. And it seems apt because Dalio became utterly obsessed with his own set of proprietary principles. He genuinely seems to view them as these inviolable, almost scientific laws for navigating financial markets, running a business, even living your life.
Where did this obsession come from?
It really seemed to accelerate back in the 1980s. Apparently, he became convinced that the American system, the U.S. economy, was basically destined for decline and collapse. This led him to see himself as this kind of economic doctor for the world. And the only prescription, the only cure, was rigid, absolute adherence to his principles. Everyone had to follow them exactly as he laid them out.
And this demand for absolute adherence, for total alignment, it led to creating this incredibly autocratic, surveillance-heavy culture inside the world's biggest hedge fund.
It really did. You could almost see it as an institutionalized attempt to achieve coherence, mirroring that MIU goal, but in a corporate setting. By around 2015, Dalio had implemented this incredibly formal, technology-driven surveillance structure to enforce his principles. They literally had internal job titles like principals captains, auditors, and overseers.
Seriously, overseer.
Seriously. Their explicit job was to monitor employee behavior, analyze interactions using algorithms, and guard against any deviation from the principles, any wrong thing. And get this. The small, elite group of trusted decision-makers at the very top, the ones who really steered the ship according to Dalio's vision, they internally called themselves the Politburo.
The Politburo, like the Soviet Politburo.
Sure.
Or the Chinese one.
Exactly, directly borrowing the term for the supreme policy-making body in Bolshevik and later Chinese communist systems. I mean, that's a profoundly loaded choice of terminology for a supposedly capitalist hedge fund operating in Connecticut.
How did Dalio even justify that level of control and surveillance? How did he sell it internally?
He wrapped it up in these seemingly virtuous concepts. The two big ones were radical transparency and idea meritocracy.
Okay, what did those mean in practice?
Well, radical transparency meant pretty much all meetings were recorded, video and audio. Employees were required, even encouraged, to openly and sometimes brutally criticize each other's thinking and performance in real time and rate each other on iPads. The idea was no hidden agendas, everything out in the open.
Sounds intense.
Extremely. And idea meritocracy was the justification for the hierarchy. It meant that only the best ideas, meaning the ideas most aligned with Dalio's principles and validated by the data and the system, should prevail, which, conveniently, justified the autocratic structure needed to identify and enforce those best ideas, with Dalio ultimately being the supreme arbiter. It sounds eerily similar to the MIU quest for absolute objective truth found through coherence, which then justifies whatever means are needed to achieve it.
This is where the story takes another unexpected turn, connecting this bizarre corporate culture directly to the top levels of American government. Because James Comey, the future FBI director, was actually involved in enforcing this whole system at Bridgewater.
That's right. James B. Comey served as Bridgewater's general counsel and also head of security for about 3 years, from 2010 to 2013, right before he became FBI director. And his role, by all accounts, was explicitly tailored to fit this unique cult-like culture. His job wasn't just standard legal stuff. He was fundamentally tasked with ensuring absolute employee fidelity to Dalio's principles. He was, in essence, the chief enforcer for Dalio's Politburo.
And there's an anecdote about Comey's methods during that time that really highlights the kind of paranoia and control operating inside the firm.
Yeah, it's pretty revealing. Biographers who've written about Comey recount this incident where, acting in his capacity as head of security, Comey apparently devised this little entrapment scheme, a loyalty test, basically.
What did he do?
He had someone deliberately leave an unattended binder containing sensitive proprietary company information, just sitting out somewhere visible, like bait. Yep. And the trap worked. Some unsuspecting low-level staffer found the binder, picked it up, and apparently looked inside. That employee was immediately identified and summarily fired for violating the principles of trust and transparency. It just paints a stark picture of the authoritarian mechanisms Comey was responsible for upholding there, and the kind of total control Dalio demanded.
Okay, so this internal model at Bridgewater, autocratic, principle-driven, surveillance-heavy, even borrowing terms like Politburo, it seems to strongly foreshadow Dalio's later, very public fascination with international strongmen and non-Western models of governance.
It really does. Dalio developed this deep, almost philosophical admiration for highly centralized authoritarian systems.
Yeah.
He came to view them as more effective, more decisive, compared to what he saw as the messy gridlock and inefficiency of Western democracies.
And he sought out relationships with figures who embodied that model.
Absolutely. He cultivated a friendship with Lee Kuan Yew, the legendary and highly autocratic founding father of modern Singapore.
Yeah.
And there's this telling story where Dalio apparently asked Lee for his opinion, which current world leader offered the best model of governance for the challenges of the 21st century.
And Lee's answer.
According to Dalio's own recounting, Lee Kuan Yew's response was unambiguous: Vladimir Putin.
Wow. And Dalio took that advice seriously. He tried to connect with Putin.
He immediately sought to act on it. He actively pursued high-level contacts in Russia, trying to get a meeting with Putin himself. We know that in 2015, Hermann Greff, who's the powerful head of Sberbank, the huge state-owned Russian bank, was helping Dalio try to broker a potential sit-down with Putin in Sochi.
The meeting happened.
Apparently, it didn't materialize in the end. But just the fact that Dalio was dedicating serious effort to it, with help from figures like Greff, shows his commitment to cultivating relationships with these strongmen. And this wasn't just about Russia. Dalio has nurtured deep, decades-long connections with the Chinese government, too. His first trip there was way back in 1984. He built close ties with very senior officials, including Wang Qishan, who later became China's vice premier, one of the most powerful figures in the country.
Okay, this brings us to the final, really crucial link in the chain. Dalio's recent public messaging, his books, his interviews, they align almost perfectly with the strategic geopolitical objectives of the Kremlin, echoing those themes of active measures we discussed.
Uncanny, isn't it? Dalio has emerged as one of the most prominent, most influential voices in global finance, actively advocating for things like de-dollarization, reducing the world's reliance on the U.S. dollar, and actively promoting the strengthening of alternative financial systems like the BRICS bloc: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
And that narrative, the rise of BRICS, the decline of the dollar, the shift to a multipolar world, that's exactly the strategic narrative pushed by the Russian government for years, designed specifically to undermine U.S. global influence.
Precisely. It's the core of their multipolar world propaganda. And the way Dalio delivers this message is straight out of that Bezmenov playbook on demoralization.
How so?
His public statements, his books like Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, they're always framed as these dire, urgent warnings. He uses phrases like, most people have no idea what's about to happen. It's classic fear-based messaging.
Designed to make people lose faith in the current system.
Exactly. It cultivates widespread anxiety and distrust in existing Western institutions, making people psychologically receptive to alternatives, even non-democratic ones like the BRICS economic architecture being promoted by China and Russia. It's using fear as a tool to promote a specific policy agenda, which is a textbook feature of Kremlin information warfare. And just as a side note on his judgment of character, it's worth remembering that as recently as 2020, Dalio was publicly praising and mentoring Sean Combs, aka P. Diddy, calling him a hero of mine.
Right before Combs was convicted of serious sex offenses.
Which just highlights a pattern, perhaps, of admiring powerful, complex, and sometimes deeply problematic figures.
So whether Dalio is doing this consciously as part of some grand strategy, or if he's simply a very successful capitalist who sees an opportunity to profit from a global power shift, the end result seems to be the same. His actions, his influence, his money, they all seem to be advancing this cause of multipolarity that benefits Russia and China.
Right. He strategically positioned himself, using his decades of contacts in China and Russia, to potentially benefit enormously from this transition if and when it happens. And all the while, the foundational ideological network, the same TM-linked influence network that Epstein visited back in Fairfield, Iowa, continues to thrive, partly thanks to Dalio's massive ongoing financial support. The circle is complete.
Okay, let's take a breath and try to synthesize this sprawling map we've just drawn. We've connected a tiny college town in Iowa to the absolute highest levels of global finance, complex ideology, and even alleged intelligence operations. Let's just quickly list out the facts we can say we've established with reasonable confidence.
All right. Fact 1. We know Jeffrey Epstein definitely visited Fairfield, Iowa back in 1988. He met there with Bill Elkus, specifically regarding the Zimmerman family's major charitable activities. And those activities were entirely focused on Maharishi International University, which was headquartered there. This wasn't just a random stop. It was an ideologically significant meeting.
Okay. Fact 2. We know that Bill Elkus and the Zimmerman family were not just casual acquaintances of MIU. They were deeply committed, longtime financial patrons and ideological supporters of the Maharishi's movement, including its political arm, the Natural Law Party. They shared the goal of replacing the current global system with one based on coherence and higher consciousness.
Fact 3. We know this MIU-linked network didn't die out. It persists and remains influential today, clearly connecting through the next generation. We see it with Henry Elkus and his Helena network, and especially with Daniel Schmachtenberger and his various meta-crisis projects. And Schmachtenberger's own key mentor, Barbara Marx Hubbard, had documented collaboration ties in the late 80s with Genrikh Borovic, the brother-in-law of the KGB chief Vladimir Khrushchev.
Right. Fact 4. Crucially, we have the testimony of Soviet defector Yuri Bezmenov, who specifically identified the Maharishi and the TM movement as targets of KGB interest back in the day. He saw their potential utility in achieving the demoralization phase of active measures by essentially encouraging apathy and distraction among the American elite.
And fact 5. We know that Ray Dalio, who has been deeply involved with TM since 1969 and is a primary financial pillar supporting MIU and the David Lynch Foundation today, has also spent decades cultivating strategic relationships with powerful figures in Russia and China. And now, he is one of the most vocal global proponents of de-dollarization and BRICS narratives that align perfectly with the geopolitical goals of Russian and Chinese active measures campaigns.
What really stands out when you lay it all out like that is the incredible consistency of the underlying worldview. This network, stretching from that Iowa campus right through to Dalio's hedge fund, consistently promotes this narrative that the current Western system is broken, doomed, and needs replacing with a new civilization, maybe one based on invincible defense achieved through consciousness, operating outside traditional democratic frameworks. That message aligns perfectly with the agenda of powers actively seeking to undermine those Western frameworks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Despite all these clear connections, these documented links, the big unknowns, the crucial missing pieces, still revolve around one central thing, the money. Specifically, the flow of potentially illicit or foreign money into this ideologically charged network, particularly back in the late 80s.
Right. Did Jeffrey Epstein actually route funds? And if he did, where did those funds originate? To Bill Elkus or to the Zimmermans, or maybe directly or indirectly to MIU itself?
That's the core question, and tied to that is the really big one. Was Epstein acting as a conduit, a cutout, for moving any part of that alleged $50 billion slush fund that KGB chief Khrushchev was supposedly trying to stash in the West around 1988? Was the MIU network, perhaps via Elkus or the Zimmermans, ever an intended recipient, or even just an unwitting laundering channel for some of those sensitive foreign funds? The definitive paper trail, the smoking gun transaction, that remains elusive. For now.
Fortunately, though, Epstein's tangled financial history is finally under intense public scrutiny, maybe more than ever before. We have to mention the ongoing investigation being led by Senator Ron Wyden. His committee is digging deep into Epstein's incredibly opaque financial empire.
Yeah, that investigation is potentially huge. Wyden's office has already revealed they're scrutinizing something like 4,725 wire transfers connected to Epstein, totaling over $1.1 billion.
Over $1 billion in just the transfers they're looking at so far.
Exactly. That staggering number strongly suggests that the full picture of Epstein's role, especially regarding the origin and the destination of potentially foreign intelligence-linked money, is really only just starting to emerge. And that 1988 Fairfield trip fits perfectly within that critical time frame of global financial upheaval and alleged KGB operations that really defined Epstein's rise to prominence.
So when you look at the whole map, the pattern seems undeniable. Epstein's known activities and associations, his obsessions with things like eugenics and controlling human evolution, his deep ties to figures promoting systemic disruption, and this multipolar world concept, it all seems remarkably consistent with the long-term strategies and goals of KGB influence operations and active measures campaigns. Hashtag outro.
So wrapping this all up, what's the overarching thesis from this deep dive? I think it reveals how this complex network, built over decades, originating somewhat bizarrely in a rural American town's meditation movement, likely served a strategic geopolitical purpose. Whether that was through the demoralization of Western elites Bezmenov talked about, or through spreading these utopian but disruptive narratives about needing a new civilization, or perhaps even through facilitating the movement of sensitive foreign capital. This network seems to have contributed, wittingly or unwittingly, to the systematic questioning and potential undermining of core Western institutions. And at the same time, it elevated and financially supported powerful figures like Dalio, who seemed poised to benefit from that very disruption.
It really does feel like the ultimate long-game influence campaign, doesn't it? Operating beneath this very appealing surface of promoting humanitarianism, world peace, personal growth, and enlightenment. And for our final provocative thought today, maybe we should circle back to the cultural figure who became the modern public face of this movement, David Lynch. His involvement is a reminder that this whole quest for coherence and a new world order is often framed by this deep sense of existential dread about the current world.
That's a great point. Lynch himself actually made a very, very telling comment, maybe unintentionally, on this whole theme of multipolarity and systemic collapse in his 2017 series, Twin Peaks: The Return.
Oh yeah, what did he say?
Well, there's a famous, very abstract episode where he visually suggests that the Trinity atomic bomb test back in 1945 marked, quote, the rebirth of evil into the modern world. It unleashed these dark forces, initiating our current existential crisis.
And that ties back to the Maharishi's message.
It echoes it perfectly. The core Maharishi argument was always about the urgent need to develop a new kind of civilization, to achieve invincible defense through consciousness, precisely because of the existential risks posed by things like nuclear weapons and the potential collapse of the current Game A world system. It's a response to that same sense of dread Lynch depicted.
Okay, so we'll leave you, the listener, with this question to chew on. What really stands out to you after hearing all this? Is this decades-long pursuit of invincible defense and a new conscious civilization a genuinely benevolent, maybe naive humanitarian effort trying to save humanity from its own destructive path? Or is this recurring utopian dream actually a sophisticated multi-generational vector for foreign influence and active measures, starting right there in Fairfield, Iowa back in 1988, and extending today through the highest echelons of global finance, populated by figures who perhaps stand to profit immensely from the collapse of the very system they claim to want to save us from? What narratives are you currently accepting, and who are they really coming from?
Lots to think about. We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.